People who grew up rich but turned out poor. What is your story? Parents quit a good job cause my dad got tired of the daily repeating pattern. It bored him too much to spend his life on it. Dad went to jail for housing fraud in 2010. I was in my teens and $10 million was seized. Went from a $800,000 house to homeless in 4 days because our family didn't even know he'd been in court for 2 years. We were really well off in Korea until we moved to America. It seemed like a piece of cake for a family like mine to start life anew with enough financial backings. My father had worked hard for his family. In the first 2 years of our life in America, my parents were scammed by shady Korean immigration lawyers. Twice. Blew all of their savings and emergency funds. We started from rock bottom again. I remember skipping 2 meals a day so we could have food to go around everyone. I also remember pulling the plug on the refrigerator because what's the fucking point if there's nothing in it? We don't look back or talk about those times anymore. My dad owned several very successful radio stations, then sold them all for several million while all the mega media companies were buying them up. We lived very comfortably for a while with a nice house and a vacation home right on the slopes of a major Colorado ski resort. He married a gold digger. Unfortunately, he bought it all with money that relied on tech stocks. Then the com bubble burst. We lost everything. He tried to sue his broker for bad advice, but only won about $200K. He then declared bankruptcy and lost everything again. Our house sold for half of its worth. I have no idea what happened to the vacation home, but I assume something similar. His wife divorced him. My dad, brother, and I all split up to try to make it on our own. He ended up couch surfing with my mom's family while he got a real estate license. He is still paying alimony. My brother and I put ourselves through school and we both have reasonable jobs now and are doing alright. Until I was 10, my family seemed to have an ideal life. Beautiful house, in a very wealthy beachfront town, expensive cars, summer camps, and everything else a kid could want. My dad was a dentist and my mom was just starting work as real estate broker. She said her money was fun money. Dad paid the bills. But, unbeknownst to us, Dad didn't pay the bills. He was living a double life with our babysitter. They even had their own house. My parents split and weeks later, the bank took our house. We, my mom and us 3 kids, were out on our asses. My dad has taken whatever was left of the money, not much, and destroyed my mom's credit with bankruptcies and delinquencies she didn't know about. We struggled for many years and had lots of help from family friends. There were many birthdays and holidays with no gifts and lots of pasta for dinner. My mom could stretch $1 pretty well since she had grown up with not much money. Now, 30 years later, my mom has become successful financially through lots of hard work. My dad is still with my old babysitter. He retired, he was forced to sell his practice because of lots of bad business practices, and is now working a minimum wage job and living in near poverty. Calm as a bitch. My dad was a millionaire. Cheated on my mom. My mom left him. He had a mental breakdown. Lost everything. Still trying to get her back 10 years later. This is a beautiful poem. I grew up in a wealthy part of the United States, and everyone I went to school with had wealthy parents. It's amazing how many of these children are now mediocre at best and not high-income earners. There was an assumption that if they simply went to college, graduated and got a job, they'd be as successful as their parents. When they weren't, they felt the world was unfair and became apathetic. My parents' neighborhood has homes in the $2 to $20 million range, and about 50% of the houses now have adult children in their 50s living with 80-year-old parents. I have a friend in her 50s, who her life plan is to just wait for her inheritance. From various stories I think she'll end up getting in the tens of millions, but for now her apartment looks fit for a recent college grad. She works just hard enough to get by until then, sometimes needing her dad pay her bills. My dad had a stroke, and the complications from that, the medical bills, and my mother becoming his caretaker led us to eventual homelessness over the course of 5 years. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. By the time I was 18 we had almost no assets because of medical costs. I became a teacher, and I'm now lower middle class and working toward middle class. My wife works for a non-profit which helps people attain financial stability. I grew up rich. I wouldn't say I'm poor, but I don't live near as well as my parents. I grew up in a house which Zillow has now valued at $5 million in a very wealthy area. My mom never worked. My dad had an office and employees, and besides my mom, 3 ex-wives. My grandmother and great-grandfather came from extreme wealth. And really, it just turned out that my dad, though he was pretending for years to run a business, have an office and be a big important person, never actually made any money. All of it was drawn from a trust that had been set aside for him, and finally when it went dry, it was over. When my parents passed I inherited about $13,000. Met that's life. I have 2 siblings that roam the earth thinking there's still something they can capitalize on from all this. Some privileged bank of connections they can make withdrawals from. But I've accepted that I'm just ordinary folk. Life doesn't owe me anything. Went from very well off to middle class. Grew up in Peru. My family was involved in government and acting. We appeared in a few shows. My mom was the face of a detergent brand. My sister was the face of some brand of cereal. I was doing commercials weekly. Being well off in a Latin American country was dangerous in the 90s. Still is. You have no idea. My mom had an armored car. We had shared guards with the other houses in my small block. We got followed all the time. Robbed at gunpoint. Moving to America to be safe meant losing it all and starting over. We cried in the plane. My mom even worked at Subway with my sister so we could get by. Now we live a nice secure life in Florida and I wouldn't go back. Not me, but my ex. Her family owned a retail business and was fairly wealthy. At some point I think the number I was given was about $30 mil. I repeatedly suggested that they set some money aside. I'm not an expert, but small businesses can go under in the blink of an eye, and it just made sense that they put away some savings just in case. Every time I brought it up I was told that I was being stupid and that real business owners don't save anything. They invest all of their earnings back into their business. Eventually I stopped bringing it up so they'd stop making me feel like shit for being concerned, and eventually after that our relationship ended. Last I spoke to her they were in the process of losing everything. The rise of online retail had absolutely ruined them. Grew up rich in Pakistan until my mother got ill and made a string of bad choices in her business. Her business partner took off with the money. Went from rich to homeless. Luckily my father still had his well-paying job, so we could slowly start to rebuild. There was a lot of loan to pay back, which my father and mother managed. Mother started from scratch again. Whereas I moved out to Germany on a loan from friends to study further, and currently I'm doing my PhD, which doesn't really pay much, but to be honest I don't care as long as it is enough to feed me and I get to do what I love. I'm pretty sure someone is gonna upload a video about this in YouTube with that Robbo voice.